Karen stood confidently on the porch of my lakeside cabin, clutching a clipboard like it made her royalty. Standing next to her was a man I didn't recognize, a bald, tall, dressed in a sharp suit, and jingling a set of keys in his hand. "You're trespassing," I shouted, slamming my truck door behind me, the gravel crunching under my boots. "What's going on here?" She turned toward me, her smug smile never budging. "Oh, hi Nathan," she said sweetly. "This is Mr. Conway. He's the new owner of the cabin." I froze. "What? Sold through the HOA?" she chimed. "All above board. This cabana, my family's cabana, had stood by this lake for 3 generations. I hadn't put it up for sale, hadn't signed a single document, and now some stranger was standing there with keys in hand?" My jaw tightened. "You can't sell property that isn't yours," I growled, storming up the steps. For the first time, Karen's smile wavered. "Well, you failed to comply with the community's aesthetic standards," she said, trying to sound official. "After 30 days of non-compliance, we considered the property abandoned." I looked around. My canoe was still tied to the dock. My tools sat neatly in the shed. My dog's bowl was still resting on the porch. "Abandoned?" I scoffed. "I was gone for a week." Before I could say more, the suited man, Mr. Conway, I lifted his phone and began dialing. "There's a hostile man on the premises," he said into the receiver. "He's refusing to leave my legally owned property." I stood there in disbelief. They were seriously calling the sheriff on me for standing on land that belonged to me. But here's what neither of them knew: the lake, the roads that led to it, and half the land the neighborhood now occupied, I owned that, too, and I wasn't about to let this go. Let me take you back to where it all started. 3 months earlier, life had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm. After 32 years of working as a civil engineer in Atlanta, I had just retired. My wife, Denise, had passed away 2 years before, taken by cancer. I spent a long, hollow year grieving. When I was finally ready to move forward, I packed up and returned to our family's old lake cabin in northern Georgia, seeking the solace she once found there. The place wasn't anything grand. It was a rustic log cabin with peeling paint and boards that creaked in the wind. But it was home, surrounded by towering trees, chirping birds, and mist drifting across the lake in the early morning. It held every bit of the beauty Denise had adored. There was just one problem: the area around the lake had changed. A developer had built a new gated community nearby called Willow Pine Shores, and somehow, the HOA had managed to stretch their jurisdiction to the lakefront. That's when I met hero Karen Baldwin. She called herself the HOA president. In her 60s, she wore giant sun hats and strings of pearls even on trash days. She zipped around the neighborhood in a golf cart like she was chauffeured royalty. Her first visit was uneventful. "Hello," she said sweetly, handing me a hefty stack of documents. "Just letting you know your cabin is now part of Willow Pine's exterior oversight zone. Nothing major or a lawn upkeep, paint colors, dock materials." I gave a polite chuckle. "This cabin's been here since before Willow Pines even broke ground," I said. She blinked, clearly not used to being told number. A few days later, a notice showed up in the mail: $75 fine for overgrown vegetation. Then came an offer of $125 for having an unapproved dock color. I assumed it was a clerical error and ignored them, but the letters kept coming. After a month of silence, I drove to the HOA clubhouse myself. The place looked like a luxury resort: a perfect lawns, water features, and even a tennis court. Inside, Karen sat behind an oversized desk like she was running a kingdom. "Ah, Mr. Grayson," she greeted me. "Finally ready to work with us?" "Work with you?" I said. "You're issuing fines for land that's not even yours." "We represent the Willow Pines community," she said primly. "Because your property borders the community lake access, you fall under our aesthetic enforcement." I narrowed my eyes. "You can't fine me. This cabin's been here longer than Willow Pines has existed." She leaned forward, offering a smile so fake it could peel paint. "Then I recommend updating your cabin to our standards or considering a sale." She slid a glossy flyer toward me. A Willow Pines real estate agent beamed from it, promising fast lakefront sales. I pushed it back toward her without saying a word. From that moment on, a quiet battle began. Someone knocked down my mailbox at Weiss. My trees were trimmed without permission, A for sale sign appeared mysteriously on my property. I tore it out and threw it away. Then one weekend, I went fishing with my old friend Walter. I was gone just a few days. When I came back, my locks were changed, and a new private property sign had been nailed to my front door. And now, that stranger was calling the police on me, backed up by a woman with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. But what Karen hadn't realized, what none of them knew, was that I never signed over ownership of the lakefront land to the developer. I'd agreed to sell road access and a handful of lots, but I had kept the deed to the lake itself, the shoreline, and all the underground utilities illegally and quietly. Why? Because Denise had asked me to preserve the land, to keep it safe. Years earlier, I'd placed it in a private conservation trust. That meant their roads, their docks, their utilities, even their fancy internet line ran through land I still owned. Karen's little stunt might have looked like a winning move, but I was already holding the checkmate. Still, I didn't act right away. I let them make their calls. I let the new owner flaunt his keys and rattle off legal jargon, and I stood there, watching. I didn't react that day because I was already planning my move as something big enough to shake their pristine little neighborhood to its foundations. Let me properly introduce the key players in this unfolding drama. There's me, Nathan Grayson, 62, retired engineer, widower, and stubborn enough to outlast a hurricane. I've lived long enough to know when to bide my time, a broken bar, and when to strike. Then there's Karen Baldwin, self-appointed queen of the HOA, obsessed with rules, wields her clipboard like a sword, and sees regulations as a form of domination. Next is Mr. Conway, real estate investor, slick as motor oil, always dressed like he's walking into a boardroom, smells like cologne and raw ambition. Walter Jenkins, my neighbor and longtime fishing partner, lives 2 cabins down. He's a retired attorney and still has a few tricks up his sleeve. And finally, Sheriff Dale, the local lawman. He knows me well, generally likes me, and absolutely hates getting dragged into HOA nonsense. When Dale rolled up that day, he looked like he'd already had enough. "What now, Karen?" he sighed. She pointed at me with theatrical flair. "He's trespassing on a property that's been sold." Dale raised an eyebrow and looked over at me. "This your place, Nathan?" Before I could answer, Conway jumped in. "Not anymore. It was sold last week, with full HOA authorization." Dale exhaled slowly and turned back to me. "You got any paperwork?" "I've got more than that," I replied, pulling a manila folder from my truck. "I've got property deeds, and I'd like to file a report attempted theft of private property." Conway's phone buzzed, pulling him aside with a frown. Karen's smile stayed frozen on her face, but her eyes darted toward the folder. Dale flipped through the documents, then gave a low whistle. "You never told me you owned this much of the shoreline." I shrugged. "Didn't think it was important until now." He looked at Karen, his expression hardening. "If these records are accurate, you've crossed a serious line." Karen's voice wobbled ever so slightly. "We followed protocol, I cut in." "You didn't." "But now, I am." The next morning, I filed a civil complaint. I also called the trustee overseeing the conservation land. Then I placed a quiet phone call to an old contact, a real estate developer I once worked with back in Atlanta. If Karen and her crew wanted to play games, I was about to flip the entire board. And just when I thought things couldn't escalate any further, they did. That night, someone broke into my cabin. They didn't know I was there, but I was, and I was ready. A faint creak from the floorboard outside my bedroom woke me instantly. It was 2:13 a.m., and I hadn't touched the lights or made a sound, but I knew every noise this cabin made like I knew my own heartbeat. Someone was inside. I slid my hand under the bed and found the cool steel handle of my old Louisville Slugger. Denise always joked it was the last home run I could hit. God, I miss that laugh. Another creak. Then a soft thud near the kitchen, a boot on wood. I moved slowly, careful and quiet. My heart was pounding louder than my feet as I crept down the short hallway, avoiding the family photos hanging on the wall. One picture of Denise and me fishing out on the lake caught my eye. It felt like she was watching me, silently cheering me on. When I reached the kitchen, I held my breath. Then I lunged forward and swung the bat. The intruder, clad in dark clothing, bolted. They dropped something metal with a sharp clang, then crashed through the front door, nearly tearing the screen from its hinges. I didn't chase them, I wasn't reckless, but I did step out onto the porch and shout into the night, "Wrong cabin, neighbor." The woods stayed silent, just frogs croaking and the lake lapping gently in the distance. Back inside, I turned on the light. Lying on the floor was a long, slender pry bar. They'd come prepared to break Ina, or maybe worse. I called Sheriff Dale. He arrived in under 15 minutes. "This hoe circus is really testing me," he muttered, dusting the pry bar for prints. "You recognize him?" he asked. "Too dark," I said. "Could have been Conway, could have been one of Karen's clipboard soldiers. But one thing's clear, they're getting scared." "That might be the first good sign I've heard all week," he said. "You still planning on going through with that land deal?" "Past the planning stage," I said. The next morning, I met Walter at our usual diner down the road, one of those places where the booths are cracked, the coffee's strong enough to wake the dead, and the waitresses call you honorable. Walter showed up with his fishing hat on and a yellow legal pad in hand, just like the old days. "I made some calls," he said, flipping through the pages. "Turns out Willow Pines built their entry gate, security post, and even their maintenance shed on land that legally belongs to you. Not whole land, not public land, yours." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Then I guess it's time they started paying rent." He grinned. "Exactly my thought." He paused. "Now about that sale, are you sure you want to do this?" "I'm not selling everything," I said. "Just enough to make them sweat." He nodded. "The buyer, remember Prescott?" I asked. "Used to work on those government housing projects with me. He's got plans for a quiet retirement community on the far side of the lake. Eco-friendly, trails, cabins, no hoe in sight." Walter's eyes sparkled. "You're turning Willow Pines into neighbors with a public retreat?" "Exactly. And I'm rerouting dock access to the opposite side of the lake. If Karen wants to use it, she'll need a paddle." He laughed, then sobered. "You know this won't be quiet. They'll come at you with lawyers, calls, threats." "I know," I said. "But they tried to take what's mine." "I'm not just fighting back, I'm taking control. This was my home, and I was going to make sure no one else ever went through what I had." That was the beginning. Prescott and his team arrived the following week to begin surveying. He flew in from Atlanta with a full crew of engineers, legal experts, and environmental consultants. Everything was done by the book. I watched from my porch as Karen stormed across the gravel road, completely ignoring the bright private property sign, and screamed at the workers like a woman possessed. "You can't build here, this land is under HOA protection." Prescott didn't flinch. He handed her a neat stack of documents. "Actually, ma'am, this is conservation land, held privately under deed. I've just signed a 25-year lease for development directly from Mr. Grayson." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You can't do that. That's a violation of HOA bylaws." Prescott's expression remained calm. "Your bylaws don't apply to this land." The workers continued measuring, clearing brush, and marking plots like she wasn't even there. That afternoon, I received a certified letter from the HOA cease and desist orders, alleged zoning violations, threats of fines. I returned it with a copy of my deed and a sticky note that simply read, "You might want to update your bylaws." Days turned into weeks. More threats arrived. Karen even staged an emergency home meeting right outside my gate, ranting into a microphone about protecting the integrity of the neighborhood. But then the real bombshell hit. A notice arrived from the county registrar's office. The HOA had submitted forged documents claiming I had abandoned my cabin, the same fraudulent paperwork they used to sell it off to Conway. This wasn't negligence. This was calculated theft. I called Walter. "I need everything you've got on HOA fraud." That night, we dug through everything, every fine, every time-stamped photo, every voicemail where Karen hinted at selling. Walter began drafting a civil lawsuit, formal and ironclad. I turned over a complete report to Sheriff Dale, who flipped through it and let out a long whistle. "They're not just going to lose money over this," he said. "They're going to lose face, big time." But even as the legal process moved forward, something bigger surfaced. Prescott called one morning. "Nathan, you need to see something at the survey site." I drove out to the forest trail where the land was being marked for the new cabins. He led me to an orange marker planted just feet from a small, concrete structure half buried under vines and leaves. "What is that?" I asked. "Some old utility box." "Transformer," Prescott replied. "It's the central power grid for all of Willow Pines." My stomach tightened. "You're telling me the entire neighborhood runs its electricity through this, and it's on my land?" "No easements on file," he said. "Which means you can legally shut them off whenever you want." I stood there for a long moment, staring at the rusted padlock and the overgrown weeds tangled around it. "We're not leasing anymore, Prescott," I said. "We're selling." I want everyone in that HOA to wake up and realize they don't even own the ground beneath their feet. But I didn't say it out of anger. I said it for everyone they'd ever bullied, for every neighbor fined over paint shades or flower beds, for the family whose kid couldn't put up a trampoline, and most of all for Denise, who believed home was supposed to be a refuge, not a battlefield. The next morning, I went out to grab the mail. There was a piece of paper taped to my truck windshield. A red marker scrawled across it, "Stop or else." Final warning. I turned slowly. Karen stood across the road, phone raised like a weapon, recording me with a smug smile. "Smile for the camera, Mr. Grayson," she said sweetly, "just documenting in case you try anything." Impulsive. I didn't blink. "You mean like living on my own property? Or maybe selling land that legally belongs to me?" Her smile twitched. "You're ruining a well-maintained community. You're destroying our peace, our standards." I took a step toward her, calm and quiet. "No, Karen, I'm just reminding you that your precious little empire, it's built on land you never owned." Then I turned back to the cabin, crumpling the threat note in my hand. I didn't throw it away. I added it to the growing folder of evidence. This wasn't just about a lawsuit anymore. This was war. The following week was unusually calm. No fines, no mysterious footsteps at night. Karen went silent. But silence from her? That wasn't peace. That was plotting. While she schemed, I finalized the sale with Prescott's team. The land was officially transferred to Prescott Riverfront Developments LLC. I kept full control over the power transformer and dock access points. My cabin would remain surrounded by eco-friendly cabins, shielded by high hedges and a private road. No HOA, no Karen. Walter and I filed the civil suit in county court, and he made sure every local news outlet received a full copy. I wasn't looking for headlines, but I was more than happy to let the spotlight find her. I may not have cared for drama, but I did care about justice. And the community deserved to know the truth about what their HOA had been doing. Not long after the lawsuit was filed, a reporter from Channel 7 reached out. "Mr. Grayson, would you be open to giving an interview?" "Not yet," I said, "but tell your viewers to stay tuned. The neighborhood's about to see a reckoning." That evening, Walter showed up at my porch with a six-pack in one hand and a thick folder in the other. He cracked open a beer, handed me one, and sank into a chair beside me. "You know," he said, "in all my years practicing law, I've never seen someone turn a land deed into a power play like this." I chuckled. "It's not about power. It's about reminding people what happens when you mess with someone who just wanted peace and to be left alone." He handed over the folder. "This might help." Inside was a printed email, an anonymous tip that had landed in Walter's office inbox. It was packed with screenshots, satellite maps, and a scanned letter bearing Karen's signature. The letter was dated more than 2 months ago. It read, "Authorization to initiate emergency reassignment of Parcel 1733A per Section 14 of the Community Recovery Action Code. No owner responds within 10 days. Proceed with sale." And at the bottom, 2 things stood out: Mr. Conway's signature, and a note of a $10,000 consulting fee wired directly to Karen's personal bank account. I stared at it for a long moment. "This is it. Proof she forged the abandonment claim." Walter nodded. "And got paid for it." I wasn't furious about the money, it was the arrogance. She thought she could bury it under layers of phony legalese and HOA jargon. That night, I sent an anonymous email to the entire HOA board. The only attachment was the letter, and the message was simple: "Ask Karen where the $10,000 went." "I'll wait." By sunrise, chaos had erupted. Before I could finish my coffee, Cars were flying into the neighborhood at speeds that would have had Karen issuing citations any other day. A crowd gathered at the clubhouse. One man was yelling across a driveway. Two women filmed themselves on TikTok ranting about stolen HOA fees. And then the flashing lights arrived at two police cruisers. I walked slowly down my gravel driveway and stopped at the edge of the road, hands in my pockets. I watched. Karen was posted in front of the clubhouse, red-faced and flanked by three rattled HOA board members. Mr. Conway was nowhere in sight. Sheriff Dale stepped out of his cruiser, adjusted his hat, and approached Karen. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I didn't need to. Her arms flailed. She pointed in every direction including mine. Then Dale's deputy said something quietly to her. And that's when Karen finally lost it. "He's the one!" she shrieked. "Nathan Grayson. He's tearing this entire place apart." Then she did the unthinkable. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and whipped it toward me, not tossed, through. It smacked the pavement just short of my boots. Dale barked, "Karen, that's assault on a civilian." Then came the words I never thought I'd hear. "You're under arrest." "Turn around." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face fell slack. "No, no, you can't arrest me. I'm the president." "And I'm the sheriff," Dale said, snapping the cuffs on. "You are being arrested for fraud, obstruction, and assault. We'll sort the rest at the station." As she was being escorted to the cruiser, she twisted back and yelled, "This isn't over. He's destroyed everything. He sold us out." I stepped forward, loud enough for every neighbor to hear. "No, Karen, I didn't destroy anything. I just saved this community from people like you." Some neighbors clapped. Others stared silently. A few looked like they were finally seeing her clearly for the first time. I started walking back toward the cabin, thinking maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. But then my phone rang. Prescott. His voice was tight. "Nathan, we've got a problem. A big one." I stopped in my tracks. "What is it now?" "Someone just filed a building freeze injunction with the county. It's an attempt to shut the project down." My jaw tightened. "Who filed it?" There was a pause. "Conway," he said. "He used a fake environmental trust, and the county signed off on it this morning." I felt my grip tighten around the phone. "They're trying to freeze the sale of my land?" "Not just freeze it," Prescott replied grimly. "They're trying to seize it." And just like that, I realized Karen hadn't been acting alone. She was just one piece of a much larger game. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Prescott's words playing on repeat in my head. "They're trying to seize it." By morning, I had read the entire injunction from top to bottom. The so-called environmental trust claimed the land was part of a heritage wetland protection zone. A complete lie. The trust didn't even exist in county records a week ago. But somehow, it had enough sway to block construction, at least temporarily. And the kicker? The complaint was signed by none other than Richard Conway, the same man who had bought my cabin illegally, the same man behind Karen's backroom deal. I stood outside with a bitter cup of coffee in hand, watching the morning light glint off the lake. The surface was calm, still, peaceful, but I'd learned better by now. This wasn't peace, it was the eye of the storm. Conway hadn't just wanted the cabin, he wanted the entire lakefront. And now, I finally understood exactly why he paid Karen that 10 grand. That explained why the HOA had rushed to legitimize Conway's fake purchase. This wasn't just about forcing me off my land, it was about claiming everything around the lake for themselves. Walter showed up shortly after sunrise, thermos in hand and a look that said he'd seen the same email I had. "They've got nerve," he muttered, passing me a cup. "Filing a fake trust? That's a whole new level of dirty." "I'm done waiting," I told him. "I want to fight this, now." Walter gave a firm nod. "We'll start with the county land board. Challenge the legitimacy of the trust and file for an emergency injunction to override the freeze. But we're going to need every shred of evidence you've got." I already had it: hollow photos, land deeds, survey reports, and even a notarized affidavit from my grandparents confirming the land's protected status decades ago. Everything was cataloged and locked away in my storage room. But when I went to retrieve it, something was off. The door was slightly open, and inside a broken bar, nothing. Every file, every box gone, the shelves were empty, and a single chair had been knocked over in the middle of the room. I stood there in stunned silence, heart pounding. They hadn't just broken in to rattle me, they came to erase my ability to fight back. I called Sheriff Dale immediately. He arrived about an hour later, surveyed the room, and frowned. "There's no forced entry," he said. "That's because they used the spare key," I replied, eyes narrowing, "the one hidden in the fake flower pot on the porch." "Only a few people knew about that, Karen and Conway." Dale's expression turned dark. "You need more security, Nathan. This is escalating." "I've got it," I said. "Installed motion-activated cameras last week, a hidden high-res." Dale perked up. "You have footage?" I led him to the cabin, unlocked the surveillance system, and pulled up the video from the night before. There he was, Richard Conway, dressed in black, slipping in through the front at 3:12 a.m. In one hand, a flashlight, in the other, a crowbar. He moved with practiced speed, straight to the storage room, loading box after box into the back of a black SUV, no license plates in sight. We backed up the footage and filed a police report. Dale looked like he was barely keeping his composure. "Give me 2 days," he said. "I'll get a warrant for Conway." But I couldn't afford to wait. With the evidence in their hands, there was no telling what they'd do: twist it, destroy it, or worse. So, I did something I swore I wouldn't. I called the press. Lindsay Marks from Channel 7 answered on the second ring. "Mr. Grayson," she said, "I'm ready to talk." That afternoon, she arrived with a full camera crew. We filmed the interview on my porch, the lake gleaming behind me, my cabin in full view. I told everything: how the HOA had fined and bullied me, how Karen forged documents to steal my home, how Conway created a bogus environmental trust to take the whole lakefront, and how, despite it all, I still legally own the land beneath their neighborhood. The story aired that night, and Willow Pines would never be the same. By morning, residents were lined up outside what used to be Karen's office, now padlocked and under police watch. Homeowners waved copies of the Channel 7 article, shouting for answers, demanding resignations. "My property's worthless if it's built on stolen land," one man yelled. Another woman added, "We paid dues for what? For fraud?" Then Prescott called. "Nathan, the freeze is lifted. County officials are investigating the trust. You've got momentum now." But before I could breathe, another blow landed. That night, I found an envelope on my doorstep, no name, no return address. Inside was a printed screenshot, an email supposedly from me to someone named Tamara Underwood, offering to sell my cabin for $10,000 cash under the table to avoid taxes. A complete fabrication. The writing wasn't mine. I'd never even heard of Tamara Underwood. But the email had a timestamp, and it was sent from my actual address. I rushed to log in. Password changed. Recovery email updated. They'd hacked me. They were flipping the narrative via trying to make me look like the criminal. I sent everything to Walter, who passed it straight to the cybercrime division. Then I reset every password I had, reinforced security at the cabin, and spent the rest of the night going through every document I still had. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, there was a knock on my door. 2 officers stood on the porch. One of them looked down at his clipboard. "Nathan Grayson." "Yes, we have a warrant to search the property. We're investigating possible real estate fraud, tax evasion, and email forgery." I stared at him, stunned. "You're kidding." He handed me the document. I scanned it quickly, heart sinking when I saw the judge's signature issued at the request of Karen Baldwin's attorney. Karen had been arrested, but she wasn't behind bars anymore, and she was coming back with everything she had. As the officers stepped inside, their hands resting on their belts, it hit me: this wasn't just a legal battle anymore, it was a full-blown war. They tore through the cabin like I was some kind of cartel boss. 2 uniformed officers, and one guy in a stiff suit wearing horn-rimmed glasses, acting like he'd walked off a courtroom set. They rifled through everything and upended the couch cushions, yanked open drawers, sifted through old boxes of family photographs. Even Denise's old sewing room wasn't spared. That one hit hardest. Her lavender quilt was still folded neatly over the chair, untouched for 2 years. Now it bore smudges from the suited man's gloved hands. "Easy with that," I snapped, sharper than I intended. He didn't even blink. The lead officer gave me a comment to be sympathetic. "This is standard procedure, Mr. Grayson. We're following a judge's directive." "A directive based on forged documents," I replied coldly. "And you know it." He didn't answer, just gave a nod to his partner and moved toward the crawl space. By the time they left, they'd taken my laptop, 2 flash drives, and a labeled box containing development agreements with Prescott. I stood on the porch as their cruiser disappeared down the gravel road, dust swirling in their wake. An hour later, Walter pulled up, both hands clutching his phone and a storm brewing in his eyes. "They're hitting you with fraud, impersonation, and something they're calling property laundering," he said. "Conway submitted an affidavit saying you used shell companies to move land illegally." I almost laughed. I should be flattered. "That's a hell of a conspiracy." "But here's the real hit," Walter said, pacing. "They've filed for injunctive foreclosure on the cabin." I froze in place. "They're trying to take it again?" "Yeah, and this time, they're using the ongoing investigation to claim the land's tainted by criminal activity." I didn't speak, just stood there, quiet, still. This cabin had been part of my family for nearly 8 decades. My grandfather had built it with his own 2 hands. My father cast his final fishing line from the dock. My wife passed away under this very roof, her hand in mine. And now some paper pusher in a tailored suit, who probably couldn't pitch a tent if his life depended on it, wanted to steal it with a few forged emails and a judge's pen. I turned to Walter. "I'm done playing it straight." He gave me a wary look. "What are you thinking?" "I want to hit them where it hurts. Not just Conway, not just the HOA. I want to break the entire foundation they've built." Walter crossed his arms. "I've got a few ideas, but we'll need backup." "Then get it," I said, "because I'm not letting them win." That afternoon, I made 2 calls. First, to Lindsay Marks at Channel 7. "I'm ready for round 2, I told her. "This time, I'm naming every last one of them." Then, I dialed an old buddy from my engineering days at Ronald Briggs. He was a power systems consultant now, one of the very few in the state authorized to shut down municipal power in emergencies. When he answered, I got straight to the point. "Ronnie, I've got something for you to look at. It's legal, a broken bar just barely." He chuckled. "Sounds like my kind of problem. Send it over." I forwarded him the transformer schematic of the one Prescott screw uncovered tangled in vines behind the ridge. It powered everything: the clubhouse, the gates, the streetlights, every cookie-cutter house in Willow Pines. An hour later, Ronald called me back. "This entire grid's running through your land. You weren't kidding." "I want to file a formal demand," I said. "They owe me lease payments for using my property without consent." He let out a whistle. "That's a bold move. Could cripple the HOA." "That's the goal." We drafted the notice together, Ronald's name on the letterhead. The demand? $162,000 in back charges, 10 years of unauthorized land use. Walter had it notarized and hand-delivered to the acting HOA president, a jumpy little man named Glenn who looked like he wanted to disappear. His hands trembled as he scanned the letter. "There's a broken bar. This has to be some kind of error," he muttered. "No error," I said. "Karen knew. So did Conway." "You've got 48 hours to respond, or I file in small claims court, and trust me, we'll win." Sweat beaded on Glenn's brow. "We don't have that kind of money. HOA reserves might cover 30 grand, tops." "Then you'd better start selling something," I replied. "Because your leadership dug this hole, and now it's caving in." 2 days passed. No response. So I filed the court claim. Then I filed something else, a formal request to the county to reclassify Willow Pine zoning status. My reason? Violations of utility use and falsified residential development permits. That triggered a full-scale inspection. A week later, county officials swarmed the neighborhood. Orange-vested city workers combed the streets. Engineers inspected drainage lines. Surveyors took measurements along property lines. And I didn't have to do a thing. Karina, now out on bail and hiding behind oversized sunglasses, called me from a blocked number. "I know this is your doing," she hissed. "You're ruining everything." "No," I said calmly. "You ruined everything. I'm just cleaning up the mess." "You think this makes you powerful? You're pathetic. Just a bitter old man clinging to a shack in the woods." I hung up, then blocked the number. 2 days later, the power went out in Willow Pines. No flicker, no warning, just total, silent darkness. The blackout lasted nearly 5 hours. The street lamps, houses, clubhouse, even the front gate had stalled out, stuck halfway open like a scene from a dystopian film. Panic swept the neighborhood, residents spilled into the streets, car alarms blaring in the confusion. The HOA's emergency hotline was overwhelmed and eventually went dead. One desperate homeowner lit a fire pit for light, unintentionally setting off a chain of smoke alarms up and down the block. And me, I sat calmly on my porch, sipping a cup of tea as the sun dipped behind the lake. My cabin glowed with warm light, the lone holdout in the darkness, all thanks to the modest solar panel Denise had insisted we install back in 2017. The next morning, Karen called the cops again. This time, she accused me of sabotaging the community's electrical grid. Dale showed up, and you could tell he was over it. "Karen, this makes the 5th call you've made in 3 weeks," he said as she waved a pile of obviously doctored paperwork in his face. "He cut the power. It's retaliation," she barked. Dale remained unmoved. "Ma'am, Mr. Grayson owns the land where your grid's installed. He filed a lawful demand notice. He followed every required step. You didn't." Karen threw up her arms in dramatic frustration. "This isn't over." Then Dale dropped the real bomb. "It will be, if the court sides with him next week. If that happens, your entire HOA could lose control of the neighborhood." He turned to me with a slight grin. "Also, we traced the break-in at your cabin to a storage unit rented under Richard Conway's name." "Your files?" "We found them, all of them." My eyes widened. "You're serious?" He nodded. "Ironclad evidence." And just in time, but before the relief could settle in, Walter called, his voice tight. "Nathan, a broken bar, bad news. The judge assigned to our case. Turns out he's Conway's cousin." My stomach dropped like a rock. "They're trying to get the whole lawsuit dismissed," Walter continued, pulling strings behind closed doors. I looked across the still water toward my cabin, and past that to the neighborhood built on fraud and cover-ups. I made a silent vow: right then, if they wanted dirty, I'd go nuclear. The courtroom smelled of stale coffee and years of bad decisions. I sat stiffly in the front row, suited up, heart pounding, and not from nerves, but from rage barely held in check. Across the aisle sat Richard Conway, wearing a smug grin like he owned the place. He had on a gray tailored suit, the same kind of look he wore when he swaggered onto my porch with keys he had no right to. His attorney, Kenneth Dritt, sat beside him, and next to them, Karen Baldwina, still in pearls, even on bail, lips puckered like she'd been sucking lemons all morning. Then the judge entered. Harold Conway, the cousin, the walking conflict of interest. I leaned toward Walter. "We're seriously doing this with his cousin presiding?" "Let it ride," Walter whispered. "I've got a card to play." Judge Conway called the court to order. "Today's hearing concerns the civil dispute between Mr. Nathan Grayson and the Willow Pines Homeowners Association, represented by Miss Karen Baldwin and Mr. Richard Conway of Conway Acquisitions." Walter stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to formally request a recusal, given your familial connection to one of the parties involved." Conway didn't flinch. "Denied," the judge replied flatly. "The court sees no direct conflict preventing fair judgment." I clenched my fist under the table. Walter simply nodded. "Understood. In that case, we'd like to submit Exhibit A." He handed a thick binder to the court clerk. Karen and Conway craned their necks as the folder opened. Inside were certified records, the original deed signed by my grandfather, complete with county stamps, a broken bar, a utility schematic proving the HOA grid crossed private land, a broken bar footage of Conway breaking into my cabin, a broken bar financial record showing a $10,000 consulting payment from Conway to Karine, a broken bar, a notarized letter from Ronald Briggs outlining the $162,000 owed in back utility usage, a broken bar, and the Kikra emails linking Conway directly to the fake Tamara Underwood Environmental Trust. The courtroom went dead silent. Even the judge hesitated as he turned the pages. Walter pressed on. "We're also submitting a sworn affidavit from the county's zoning officer affirming that Mr. Grayson never breached any environmental codes, and that the injunction based on the fake trust was entirely fraudulent." Judge Conway cleared his throat. "I'll review the material." Then Walter pulled out his phone. "One final point, Your Honor. If you continue to preside over this case without recusing yourself, we have a formal complaint already prepared for submission to the Judicial Ethics Commission." That made the judge blink. Karen leaned toward Conway, hissing in a panic. "What do we do now?" Judge Conway set the binder down slowly and looked at me no longer with indifference, but with caution. This court will recess for 48 hours while we assign an independent review judge. Victory, Round 1. Outside the courthouse, Lindsay Marks from Channel 7 intercepted me as I made my way down the steps. "Nathan, that was unbelievable. Do you think the new judge will be on your side?" I gave her a calm smile. "I'm not asking for favors, just a fair shot." She turned back to the camera with a grin. "You heard it here, folks. This lakeside legal battle just took a dramatic turn." Back at the cabin, I tried to readjust once, to sit by the fireplace, close my eyes, and pretend Denise was beside me, whispering that it was almost over. But peace didn't linger long. The next morning, Prescott called. "We've got a serious situation," he said, tension thick in his voice. My stomach tightened. "What now?" "The HOA board declared a neighborhood emergency. They're trying to dissolve the HOA completely and hand off all its assets to Conway's company." "What?" I nearly dropped the phone. "They can't do that. If they succeed," Prescott said grimly, "they'll bury your lawsuit under a corporate shell and argue that none of the board members can be held personally responsible." I stood at the lake's edge, trying to process it. Conway was attempting to erase the HOA entirely before the court could hold anyone accountable. Karen's final trick is scrap the board, hand everything to the money man, and vanish. But this time, I was ready. What they didn't know was that during the court's 48-hour recess, Walter and I had filed a second lawsuit. This one bypassed civil court and went straight to the Land Commission. It directly targeted Conway's holding company. We placed a lien on the transformer station. Without it, his entire new development was stuck in limbo. We also issued cease and desist orders to every construction partner he'd hired, citing unresolved legal matters. And for the final blow, Walter dug up permits from a decade ago, showing that Karen's backyard deck extended 3 feet into protected lakeside buffer zone as a clear grounds for mandatory removal. The next morning, I returned to Willow Pines, clipboard in hand and a grin on my face. Karen was out front, watering her roses. She didn't notice me at first. "Good morning," I called out brightly. She turned, caught off guard. "You again?" I handed her the notice. "You'll need to have your deck removed by the end of the week." "County's orders," she gasped. "You're bluffing." "Not today." And then I turned and walked away. That evening, as I sat quietly on my porch, the phone rang. It was Walter. "You need to turn on Channel 7A right now." It was Lindsay Marks again, this time on primetime. "Tonight on Community Expose copyright, a retired engineer battles a corrupt homeowners association and might just end up owning the very neighborhood that tried to bring him down." The screen cut to scenes from the courtroom, images of Karen's illegal deck, and sweeping drone shots of my cabin, proud and quiet at the lake's edge. Then Lindsay said something that made me sit forward. "Sources now confirm that the state attorney general is reviewing the case for potential criminal prosecution. Karen Baldwin and developer Richard Conway may soon face charges for fraud and environmental misconduct." Karen and Conway weren't just losing their land. They were about to lose everything. And just as I felt a weight lift as though the end was finally within reach, my phone rang again. It was Dale. "Nathan, a broken bar, your cabin's on fire." The phone slipped from my hand. My chest locked up. "No, a broken bar, no. That's not possible," I murmured, already sprinting barefoot to my truck. I sped down the winding roads, headlights cutting through the dark. Over the trees, I could already see the thick, rising column of smoke, black and heavy, curling into the sky like a warning. Flashing lights strobed across the gravel as I arrived. The glow of the fire wasn't warm or welcoming. It was savage, violent rate of flames clawing upward, the roof caving inward like a wounded animal folding in on itself. Fire engines screamed. Their lights danced through the trees as crews rushed to contain the inferno. I collapsed to my knees before I even realized I'd dropped. The heat slammed into my face like a wall. I don't remember screaming, but I remember the pain. Dale pulled me back by the shoulders just as I lurched forward. "Nathan, don't." "It's gone." I shook my head, still reaching, desperate for something. Denise's old quilt, maybe, the photo albums, anything that might have survived. Dale's voice turned grim. "This wasn't an accident. We've already found traces of accelerant along the porch. It was arson." Moments later, Walter arrived, breathless and pale. "Oh my God, Nathan." I saw the fire from the highway, I thought they were exaggerating if they weren't, I whispered, numb. Then Dale's voice dropped, low and furious. Security camera caught everything. He held out his phone, showing me the footage. Grainy, but clear enough. A black SUV, the same model Conway drove, pulled up quietly. A hooded figure stepped out, wearing gloves, carrying a canister. They poured fluid across the porch, struck a match, and drove off into the night. We couldn't see the face, but we didn't have to. Karen may have sparked the flames and this war a broken bar, but Conway, he wanted to end it in ash. They thought fire would scare me away, that it would burn my roots, drive me out for good. But Conway overlooked one thing. You can't set fire to the earth beneath a man's feet. The cabin was just timber and nails. What I still hated: the shoreline rights, the easements, the transformer station, the roads. Those were untouchable. Unless he planned to torch the whole town, he couldn't stop me. And with that one desperate act, he just struck the match that would ignite the end of everything he'd built. By morning, the fire department confirmed what we already knew: arson. The footage was handed over to the sheriff, and Dale opened a full-scale investigation. That afternoon, Lindsay Marks returned, this time, visibly shaken. "We're planning a full expose till the copyright," she said quietly. "Conway's gone too far." Standing in front of the smoldering ruins of my home, I looked into the camera and said only one thing: you can't burn out a man's soul, you only teach him how to rise hotter. The clip went viral. Within hours, homeowners from across the state flooded social media with their own accounts as stories of HOA bullying, Conway shady land grabs, and unfair fines. "Burn but not broken" began trending. And then, everything changed. 3 state inspectors arrived at Willow Pines. A federal audit into Conway's property deals was launched by the Department of Justice. And the new judge? He didn't just review our case, he pushed it to the front of the docket. A week later, we were back in court. Walter stood beside me. Across the aisle, Karen looked drained older. Conway looked like sleep hadn't found him in days. The judge didn't waste words. "The court finds that Mr. Nathan Grayson's property rights were violated through fraudulent documentation and unlawful trespass. The sale of his cabin is hereby declared void." A pause. "The Willow Pines HOA is found liable for damages, and Mr. Richard Conway is referred to the district attorney for a criminal investigation on counts of fraud, impersonation, and arson." Gasps filled the courtroom. "And due to misappropriation of community funds," the judge added, "the Willow Pines HOA is to be dissolved immediately, and all physical assets including land, buildings, and undeveloped lots shall be liquidated." That's when it really sank in. They hadn't just lost power, they'd lost everything. Conway jumped to his feet, shouting, "You can't do this. My lawyers will have your badge." The judge banged his gavel hard. "If you don't sit down, Mr. Conway, you'll be hearing from the State Corrections Board instead." Karen didn't say a word. For the first time since this began, she sat still, defeated. Weeks passed. The land was sold off. Prescott acquired the vacant HOA lots and opened them to independent builders. No HOA oversight, no board, no petty rules, just real homeowners, building real homes. Karen's house was foreclosed and auctioned off. Conway, he was arrested after investigators tied him not only to my fire, but to multiple fraudulent property seizures in nearby counties. As for me, I rebuilt. Not the same cabin, but close. Friends came from everywhere to help. Walter donated the windows. Prescott sent his best crew. Even Dale spent his weekends swinging a hammer and cracking bad jokes. We built it with our hands, the way my grandfather once had. One evening, I sat on the new porch with a cup of coffee, stars glittering over the lake. Walter joined me, staring out over the water. "You think they'll ever come back?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not after what we did." He smiled. "Feels like something out of a movie." "No," I said. "It feels like justice." I reached into a box beside me and pulled out Denise's photo, edges singed, but the image still clear. I placed it gently on the new mantle. She would have smiled, and not because we won, but because I didn't let them take what truly mattered. Not my peace, not my pride, not my home. If you've ever stood your ground when the odds were against you, if you've ever refused to let injustice steal your spirit, this story is for you. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if the story gave you strength, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Because when the world pushes too hard, sometimes the only answer a broken bar is to own the land they stand on.